I say that when I'm having a really, a challenging day on the mountain, of which there are many, I've seen a lot of death in the mountains and, a variety of challenging things, that I go to the handle toe, which is like the beginner run, which is the first little free rope toe kind of thing that we have. I often park myself at the bottom of that just to see the pure joy on people's face when they first really connect to the thrill and just the pure fun of the sport. And that rejuvenates me for then whatever's next.
Before she was a CEO, Gwyn Howat shoveled snow, taped bindings, and rode storms at one of the snowiest ski areas on Earth, Mount Baker, in the far northwest corner of Washington state. If you've never been, you might think this episode is about skiing, just in time for summer. But it's not really about skiing. It's about what it means to be a steward of a place, to bottle magic that forms community, to commit to joy, to safety, and to nature in all its moods. This is a story about snow, yes, but also about culture over cash, leadership without ego, and what it feels like to watch a 10-year-old light up when they're just learning to slide down a hill. Welcome to Pacific Time, the podcast where we ask the big what-if questions about the future of the West Coast. I'm your host, Greg Ammerfell. Sure, this show dives into the possibility of political independence on the West Coast. It's also about exploring the independent mindset that makes our region unique. Gwyn Howat is a perfect representative. For over 30 years, Gwyn helped shape one of the most beloved and independent ski areas in North America. She's also one of the first women to lead a ski area. In this first part of our conversation, we talk about growing up on the mountain, building community through sport, and what it takes to steward public lands, run a private business, and deal with a changing climate and changing government. To get the conversation started, I told Gwyn the story of how I first heard of Mount Baker. I was in my 20s learning to snowboard in Lake Tahoe. And we'd go back to our cabin afterward and tell stories and drink beers. And one of my buddies was a writer. And he told this, what I thought was the crazy story about going to some publisher and pitching the idea of writing a book about snowboarding, where he basically got paid in advance to tour all these mountains all over the West Coast and weigh in on where the best places were to snowboard. And this is at the time in the mid 90s when snowboarding was still pretty new. I asked him, what was your favorite hill? And he said, oh, Mount Baker. And we said, why? And he said, well, did you know that this little independent mountain in the upper left corner of the United States gets more snow than anywhere else in the country, and it's just stunningly beautiful? And that was the first time I heard of it. In parallel, you've been living and working at Mount Baker for a long time by that point. Could you start off by telling us what Mount Baker is?
Oh my gosh. Oh, there's many nuances and layers to that. For those listening who are maybe outside the Pacific Northwest or haven't been to Mount Baker, that mountain itself is a volcano. We're the northernmost volcano in the Cascade Range. So as the crow or the raven flies, I like to say, we're about 7 miles or so from the Canadian border. And the ski area of Mount Baker was founded in 1952. People had actually been coming there in the 30s. My grandparents actually drove their old vehicle up this crazy 2-lane mountain dead-end road back in the 30s to actually sidestep and hike Austin Pass, as did many people kind of World War II area, post-World War II, when skiing kind of really started to come into the United States. And Baker was one of those areas, actually. In 1952, the ski area was founded, and we're about 10 miles to the north of the volcano, which plays very much so into the key piece of information that your friend mentioned was, and they get so much snow. We actually hold the world record for the most snow to ever fall in one winter. And our location just north of the volcano is a key component of that. We are, what shall I say, our location is a natural phenomena. Much like the North Shore of Hawaii is for waves, or the Columbia River Gorge is for wind, or something like that. We are in a very special place because what happens, in a quick explanation, is the storms come in off the Pacific, and the way they rotate out in the Pacific Ocean, the prevailing wind is a southerly wind that gets funneled down the Straits of Juan de Fuca out off the Olympic Peninsula And then the wind turns and it hits the south side of Mount Baker, the volcano, and the air gets uplifted. It's called orographic effect. And literally the air gets cooled at this higher elevation and it snows right over our little ski area. And so I've actually flown over the ski area in first snowfall, and it's fascinating because there will be a ring of white literally around our little 1,000 acres, basically. If you can ski or ride Baker, you can ski or ride anywhere in the world. There's a lot to how the ski area was then developed to maintain its real natural feel and look as well. And that also makes for some really exciting riding and terrain and all that. Anyway, to answer your question though, yeah, my dad became the general manager of Mount Baker in 1968. And so I came there when I was about 2 years old. We lived in Bellingham, which is about 56 miles away, but spent every weekend of my life up until I went to the UW to go to college at the ski area. So anyway, yes, it's a special place, and now I've been working there for 34 years.
And it's an interesting time for us to be talking because you've made a big decision in recent months about your future at the ski area, haven't you?
I have. I'm, shifting how I've come through many aspects of the ski and, ski business, ski industry, that type of thing, from being, just a skier and enjoying it as part of my life to then choosing it as part of how I earn money, I say, because I didn't maybe choose it intentionally as a career, but I guess I did because I have always just understood intrinsically how important it is for my own well-being to stay connected to the outdoors. And I knew that if it affected me that much, that if I could also make a living or have a job by helping to provide other people happiness and well-being, then that's how I have chosen to spend my time. And when I started in management and operations management in particular, I think at that point I was one of 4 women out of 450 ski areas in North America in management. And so I've seen a lot of social changes within our industry as well. And now I went through to CEO and president of the company. And now it's an interesting thing being a part of succession, I guess you would say. And I'm choosing now to step away more from the day-to-day operations, take a bit of a break from that, but certainly keep my eyes and my heart and my intention and my knowledge focused on the future, long-term planning, because we have a very special place and I care deeply about maintaining that.
And just for listeners who hear me talking about secession a lot, we're not talking about the kind of political separation. We're talking about succession, meaning handing the baton to a new generation of leaders at Mount Baker.
Succession.
Yeah.
There, thank you. That's better.
So yeah, I mean, I think you've hinted at this, but I mean, Gwyn, you've worked in nearly every job possible at Mount Baker. You've worked at the lifts, you've shoveled snow, and you've been the CEO. What's kept you on the mountain for so long?
Well, the challenge and the interest and the variety for sure. And certainly being in the seasonal business is very interesting. But for sure, what's kept me in it is sense of purpose. I guess you would say that those things that I've learned or had to do in business are all the day-to-day practical, realities that actually come together to form this entity that just provides fun. And what's kept me there is just seeing the smiles and the pure joy on such a variety of people's faces, and also doing so in a way that, I'm very proud of our connection in the community, how our business, helps support other local businesses. It's all pretty complex, but very powerful. And all those nuances are part of what have certainly kept me there. I say that when I'm having a really, a challenging day on the mountain, of which there are many. I've seen a lot of death in the mountains, and a variety of challenging things that I go to the handle toe, which is like the beginner run, which is the first little free rope toe kind of thing that we have. I often park myself at the bottom of that just to see the pure joy on people's face when they first really connect to the thrill and just the pure fun of the sport. And that rejuvenates me for then whatever's next.
Yeah, super fun and super serious at times. You mentioned community. Could you explain the legendary bank slalom? Because I've heard you talk about this as a highlight of most every winter for you and for the Mount Baker community. What is it and why does it endure?
First of all, what it it is the longest running snowboarding event in the world. And just a very quick history, my dad and one of the early founders of snowboarding, Tom Sims, when Mount Baker, as a little context here, was the first. We think it's the first, and if anyone else says otherwise, call me out. Happy to have it, but I do believe that we were the first, possibly in the world, to allow snowboarding on chairlifts. And that has some nuances to it into itself. So we embraced snowboarding from the get go. And they were looking to have a competition. And, competitions are important to help progress any sport, I would say. And my dad is a very competitive person. And so he was all about that. So they came up with this idea of kind of setting some gates out. And he's like, I don't know. That's too much like skiing. You don't want to be like skiing. Of course, then this is when snowboarding was like the rebel sport. So we have what's called a natural half pipe. Basically, it's a creek bed. It's this big creek bed high up on the mountain. And when it fills in with snow, it makes a perfect, beautiful half pipe. And he's like, what if we put the gates up on the walls? And so it's a timed event. So there's no judges, which is helpful. And it showcases what snowboarding really is about, I guess you would say, is that feeling, much like people talk about the surf feeling or whatever, where you can come up and, glide up on the walls and find a flow that is different than you can find on skis, which, by the way, I am a skier. So they set the gates up on the wall and it was phenomenal. It worked really well and super fun. Anyway, I have since gone on to then set the race course for the legendary bank slalom for 34 years, I guess. So, yeah, showing my age, that's what I'm talking about. And I absolutely love it because for me personally, it's like a work of art because it's built flow. And so you go in and you build this beautiful flowy course, and then 1,200 people come and ride it for 3 days, and then it goes away and you start again the next year. What it is, and as it relates to the snowboard world and community, is it's a really interesting, has a very interesting history of community, because it's so rooted in the early days of snowboarding. It's kind of become what they say is kind of like the cult classic or the gathering place of snowboarding to celebrate the sport, the people in it, the history, all of that. And part of what's contributed to that is when snowboarding really took off in those early years, we were one of the first competitions, but all of a sudden there were these big air contests and all these other contests that were giving out these huge prize money. And we were like, oh my gosh, how are we going to, we cannot compete with this at all. So what else can we do? And we decided to double down on for the purity of the sport. And so we decided to go for culture versus cash, we call it. So we stopped giving prize money at all. And by the way, this is a pro amateur event. So this event, which is another unique part of the race of the course, is that kids that are 10 years old, we call them the next generation, to Olympic snowboarders, all the way up to seniors, all compete on the same course on the same day, all complete it, and all are challenged, which is very unique in sport. I don't know really that there are very many activities like that. So anyway, but we knew that we couldn't continue to give prize money to the degree that other competitions were offering it to the pros. So we decided to offer collectible art. And so I went and commissioned some local Native American artists here, Salish artists, and had them make these just beautiful Native American pieces of artwork. And that started off this tradition of giving some type of art, which now is primarily Pendleton blankets because it has a lot of history here in the Northwest, and then also duct tape trophies. And the trophies are made out of duct tape because duct tape is an ode to the early days of snowboarding, which my sister was a professional snowboarder in the very early days. And I literally traveled with her when she was on the circuit. And the bindings and the strapping systems were so unreliable that I literally duct taped her into her bindings. And any snowboarder can tell you in the early days that duct tape was key, whether it was helping hold your car together at the time or your gear. Anyway, so that's what the duct tape trophies are.
Wow.
This is actually a key component. Two things to what has helped contribute to community. One, in the early days, we decided that from a sponsorship standpoint, that we wanted to have the sport support itself in this event. And so it's non-exclusive sponsorships. So that, which was very unique at the time. So that means that there isn't just one snowboard sponsor. There can be many. We all play nice together, basically, to support what this is. And the other is we don't allow outside kind of classic media. We've been approached by some of the large networks and things like that, but we've kept it kind of low key because that also gives the pros a chance to come and be together and just reconnect with why they love the sport so much. And so it's also this very rejuvenating experience for the pro riders and inspiring in many ways to them, because we also set up the next generation category next to the pros, so they get to interact with the kids and the kids can interact with them. And so it kind of helps perpetuate this idea of community through the common love of the mountains and of the sport.
You're echoing some points that were made by Aaron Hurst in a recent episode of Pacific Time. He's the founder of the U.S. Chamber of Connection, which is trying to create more ties between people. And he was talking about sports and how it's a great example of community building because people have common cause and because it's got ritual. I'm hearing some of those same elements, but then amplified by the fact that you kind of have celebrated participation rather than television, and that you add in the layer of everyone sharing this experience in an incredibly wondrous outdoor environment.
Absolutely. And I'll add one more key piece to that: food. Food is the gathering, as the gathering motivation. At the top of the race course, we cook these amazing pots of paella for all the racers. And then we also on Saturday have a salmon barbecue that hosts about 800 people.
It's really something. And by the way, you just made me very hungry. And noting your current location there in rural Hawaii with roosters crowing in the background, what's calling you next?
Well, I'm here in Hawaii to regroup and warm up a little bit, but I enjoy being here because of the ocean. And I say that the mountains have certainly been much of my life and my work, but the water is my wilderness. And so I come to the saltwater, or I enjoy the saltwater as a place of my happy place also. And so I'm here to learn how to wing foil, pick up a new sport, and also to regroup and exactly answer those questions. What's next?
So you were there at the birth of snowboarding, and now you're figuring out how to hold a kite in your hands to propel a surfboard with a big fin on the bottom.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. Yeah, flow, I guess, the water is an amazing place for that, and challenge. And coming into 60, I thought, okay, this is, I got one good steep learning curve left in me here for sure. I better get with it. So wing foil is my choice right now.
I doubt very much that this is the last steep learning curve you're going to climb, but I appreciate your draw to something like that.
Well, physically, maybe, I don't know.
Fair enough.
I have no interest in parachuting.
Let's shift gears. I want to talk about public land and stewardship, and the idea of kind of the mountains as a commons. What does it mean to steward a ski area on public land?
First of all, I'll mention that there are many ski areas in the U.S. that are on Forest Service land, so United States Forest Service land, national forests, and there are some that are on private land. So it's not a one size fits all, but in our case, we are on Forest Service land, the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest. To steward a ski area there relates very much to providing meaningful experiences for people in nature, which is connected to one of the original purpose of the United States Forest Service, which is to serve the public by serving local communities as well as the environment. And also working towards a concept that the founder Gifford Pinchot put out, which is utilizing the natural forests for the greatest good, for the greatest number in the long run. And so stewarding the ski area, that's fundamental philosophy, and those principles are what have been the basis of how I have chosen to make decisions and steward a business, a for-profit business, also in this environment. So it's a dance. It's a dance of remembering that you're there utilizing public land to serve people and community and positive human experiences in nature. And at the same time, in order to continue to perpetuate that experience and provide a good one and a safe one as possible, that you also need to create a healthy and successful business.
What are the brass tacks of managing a private for-profit business in a ski area on land that's owned by the United States?
Well, there's a lot of collaboration and partnership with the agency. So the reality is there's we operate under what's called a special use authorization. So you get a permit if you want to talk brass tacks kind of thing. You get a permit. You're issued a permit. Then we have permit administrators and district rangers who oversee. There's guidelines by which we operate and activities that require things like NEPA, which is the National Environmental Protection Act process for any type of land disturbance or any type of continued development and things like that. So there's some, real clear guidelines and parameters around operation within on the national forest. And then there's a fee. So there's a portion of proceeds which is was established by Congress in terms of the percentage of that gets paid to the Forest Service based on our revenue, essentially in certain categories of revenue. So the Forest Service benefits financially from that, which interestingly, I'll add to that right off the bat that in 2024, of all the receipts, let's call them receipts received by the United States Forest Service for various activities across the nation, that timber sales or timber, let's just call it timber in general, represented about 37% of the revenue generated on United States Forest Service lands, but recreation represented 46%. So it's a significant form of revenue and also an important way that you could talk about caring for the land and serving people. As far as the purpose of the national forests in particular, we can see that recreation is a really important part of that. When I speak of recreation too, I like to encourage people to think of the root of recreation, which is to recreate and to come back out and to recreate or reconnect with ourselves, with nature. That type of thing is the benefit of recreation.
I want to come back to that. There are a bunch of themes you're hitting on that I think are really interesting. First of all, back to the brass tacks. In the popular imagination, there's no such thing as good government. The government agencies are often maligned as just being bureaucrats. And I bet you have examples of where the relationship between your company and the Forest Service has worked really, really well, or helped you do things differently that you came to really appreciate. So I'd love to hear those stories, and then by contrast, where are examples where kind of bureaucracy gets in the way.
Big topics there. First of all, I would say that I feel very fortunate to work with the people that I've worked with over the years, of which, through the challenges within the agency and funding within the agency, which is a whole nother topic, people have come and gone a fair amount. But what I have always really appreciated is the people within the Forest Service that I've had the benefit of working with all come to that job or that place because they really do care about the land. They really do care about the purpose of the agency. They're deeply rooted in trying to answer these complex questions about even sometimes conflicts of interest about how do we interact with the natural environment? How do we help manage public lands for the benefit of society and the environment? And these people are willing to take on those questions. And that ranges from the biologists who are looking out for, the endangered species, all the way to the district rangers, the permit administrators who are trying to figure out how to, make it realistic to have some public entities, be able to perpetuate and have successful businesses as well on the land. I would say, I don't know the exact statistics, but in our small district alone, I would say from what the staffing was, say, back in the 90s or so, I bet we're at a small fraction of that now. And so there's a lot of burnout because there literally is too much work and too many things to do to even maintain the baseline, that it's very stressful for people within the organization. And recent cutbacks in the last couple of months have just really impacted people I know personally. It's been really challenging. I will say that our upper district management is still intact, which is very good because there's a lot of very valuable historical knowledge. And that's the part that is deeply concerning to me, is with deep cuts, the loss of historical knowledge and context can be very detrimental to the stewardship of the public lands.
So, two things I take from your answer. One, I don't hear you talking about an adversarial relationship between you and kind of nameless, faceless government bureaucrats. What I do hear you saying is partnership and knowing the humans that are working in the Forest Service office and administering the permits and things, not just as people, but kind of in pursuit of common goals. And it sounds like you both work to kind of navigate through the built-in tension between taking advantage of natural resources and protecting the environment and serving people. There's a lot more to the way this actually works than what you might believe in a social media post about government bureaucrats.
Yeah, well, ultimately, government bureaucrats are people. And I think that we're all we all are feeling the effects of that and the really human effect on what's been going on. And when we don't recognize that fact, or we push that fact aside, it becomes a very much an othering. And here we are, in that that's not how I like to do life or business. And so, I do make efforts personally and in my work to keep those personal connections going, because that's where hopefully common understandings and or positive relationships can be built enough to be able to actually respectfully and effectively handle difficult questions. And when you get into, like you say, the kind of built-in tension between an oversight agency and the people doing business, that there is always a dance of that, and to not get deadlocked in just our differences, but try and maintain a compass heading towards the underlying benefits to, once again, the public and the environment. This is the era for all of us to be considering, how do we measure success? What do we call success? And how do we measure that outside of what is the traditional GAAP accounting, bottom line, financial statement, shareholders' equity or profit? Because that question and that concept plays very much into play with public lands, because success is also in maintaining diversity and healthy environments within that, as well as serving the public. So it's a great microcosm of the questions that are at stake in our society and culture in a broader sense.
What are the lessons you've learned about kind of managing the relationship between recreation, commerce, and environmental uses of public land?
That when you can strike that balance, I think you can call that sustainability. That's what sustainability really is. But besides that, it's really gratifying. It's something that you just feel in your gut when you know that it's working. And I would say that in general at Mount Baker, as an independent ski area, we've had the benefit of choosing, like the Bank Slalom. The Bank Slalom is not the kind of profit generator that a large corporate sponsored event is, right? And so there are areas where you need to intentionally choose, where are we investing in social or environmental benefit, and keep that balance between what's a reasonable, quote, investment in that, meaning that investment can come also in the form of not showing a typical profit. In our case, how much fun are people having? And how do you measure that? Talking to them, reading their thank you letters, seeing their faces, reaching out in the moment with them, interacting in the moment with them. And so a lot of how I've come to learn how to measure success in this model is you have to go out there and get the data yourself, get the information yourself, which means you got to interact a lot with people, observe, interact, ask questions, invite feedback or input, those kind of things.
So this is a show about independence, and sure, we could talk about political independence, and maybe we will, but it's also about kind of an independent mindset. And you and your family, along with your very supportive board, have made the decision to remain as an independent ski area against the tide of consolidation and private equity rolling up and merging a bunch of other ski areas around the country. you're hinting at a bunch of decisions that strike me as being motivated by a wider set of factors than just the bottom line. But could you talk about what it means to be independent and the decision to stay independent?
First of all, I'll add to that, we're fiercely independent. And the reason that I say that is because we're locally owned and we are deeply rooted and connected in our community. And because of that, that's also converted into good, successful business. And what it means to be independent, I guess, is that you can choose, as I imagine it, because I've not worked in an industry that, for a company that isn't, but I hear from others in our industry and colleagues in my industry who really, express frustrations around what it means to not be in as an independent decision-making process, I guess you would say, is what it comes down to. So we can choose to make decisions as it relates to the business that benefit our community directly. And the way that I have framed that is that when we benefit community and we reach out and we create programs or things that entice more people to come to the mountain, that is also a process of building our long-term business. So it does eventually convert into good business. And in an independent organization such as ours that has such a long legacy, that you're helping me kind of distill this down to, we get the benefit of actually acting more for the long run, making decisions that are for the benefit of a longer vision than what some people who are charged with meeting that month's or that quarter's financial statement successes have the benefit of making, and or have to spend a lot of time justifying. Let's say that when you're focused on a short-term gain, that sometimes that produces a different decision or a different result than when you're focused on a longer-term one. The other piece is that it's forced efficiencies in many ways because we're 100% dependent for our revenue on the sport, on people's enjoyment of skiing and snowboarding and their desire to continue to come to the mountains. It forces efficiencies. It forces long-term thinking. It forces frugality in many cases in areas that takes deliberate decision-making and prioritization. So it's intentional. It becomes very intentional in how you make decisions, and conversely to raising prices. One of my least favorite time of the year is when we set prices, because it's a real delicate dance. And I also know that it has a direct impact on people. Being independent means that we take all that into account when we're making decisions, not just taking into account a single bottom line. Even though I don't want to sound too altruistic here, I get that running a multi-million-dollar business, you need to turn a profit to stay alive and to perpetuate the entity, which then serves people. So it's all part of it.
Yeah, and worth noting that Mount Baker, at least as of this past winter, had a walk-up ticket price for a day pass of $97. Now, that's expensive to a lot of people, but I can't think of the last time I paid less than $100 for a lift ticket at any other mountain anywhere in the country.
Yeah, I hear you. And both that, yes, relatively speaking, I paid $309 for a ticket this year somewhere in Colorado, which I shall remain unnamed because I almost feel bad saying it. But I also, like you, completely understand that it's no joke to pay $100 for something for a day. Like, that's real, let alone when you bring a family. And that's like a whole nother topic unto itself. Absolutely. But suffice to say that, I really am grateful for the people I work with, for the board of directors, for our structure here of being able to at least have those conversations and make decisions based on experience, the experience of people, what's going to help what's going to help keep our safety and our safety record and keep the facility, well honed for the future, and also make it so that people who live and work in our community in Whatcom County can actually make the mountains part of their winter life, as opposed to just something you save for and then have once a year vacations. Now, granted, there's places for that, but that's what's starting to happen is like, how do we answer those questions in the mountains of what is a home mountain You even want to call it independent because now that there's so much consolidation in this industry, let's just call it a home mountain, maybe, versus a resort, which is also why we call ourselves a ski area. We are not a resort. And I think of that in terms of how I travel as well. I mean, there are plenty of places and they all have a role for very consolidated, I'm going to call it very consolidated recreation and more of the resort capacity in the world. And then there's people who seek more off the beaten path. And there's places for all of that, I believe. And what I hope can be maintained in the mountains is the option for home mountains, more local, community-based mountains, as well as the larger, more, I'll call them resort-based concepts.
Thanks to Gwyn Howat for being here. That moment she described, restoring her perspective by watching beginners catch the joy of snow for the first time at the rope pole, that stayed with me. Maybe because it feels like a reminder of what's worth protecting in the West. Innocence, discovery, possibility, growing confidence. In such a simple moment. This conversation, like Gwen's career, wasn't just about skiing. It was about choosing purpose over profit, stewardship over spectacle, and community over consolidation. It's about what it means to hone in on the simple essence of what makes us thrive so we can keep public places and shared experiences in them special. It's about recreation, and as Gwen says, recreating ourselves in wondrous landscapes with fun people exploring each of our physical possibilities. Think about a time you were an exhilarated beginner or glimpsed an open West Coast landscape for the first time, and maybe ask yourself, what's worth preserving even when it's hard? What brings joy when the storms come or don't come? When the numbers don't tell the whole story? My conversation with Gwen continues in a future episode when we'll dive deeper into climate change, widening access to the outdoors, enabling human flourishing, and the what-if questions that may lead us to savor and preserve places like Mount Baker. Thanks as always for being with me in Pacific Time. Be sure to share this with skiers and snowboarders in your lives, maybe even some young people who could benefit from the example of an inspiring, fiercely independent leader. See you next time.